So welcome everyone. Welcome to Notre Dame Ethics Week 2020. I'm Martin Kremers, I'm the Dean of the college. And I'm very honored to introduce our speaker for this session, Dr. Carolyn Woo, the former Dean of Mendoza and the former CEO of Catholic Relief Services. So I joined Notre Dame in 2012, and by that time, Dr. Carolyn Woo had just stepped down as Dean and had already started as CEO of Catholic Relief Services, so we didn't quite overlap. Dr. Woo is originally from Hong Kong. She came to the United States in 1972 to study at Purdue University, where she would earn her bachelor's, master's, and PhD in strategy. She subsequently joined the Purdue faculty, assuming numerous administrative positions and faculty positions before being recruited to serve as the Dean of the Mendoza College of Business. During her tenure as Dean from 1997 to 2011, our undergraduate program would become ranked by Bloomberg Businessweek as the #1 undergraduate business school in the nation, which we maintained for 5 consecutive years. Among her many notable achievements, Dr. Woo was elected the first female chair of AACSB International and led the launch of the Principles for Responsible Management program, part of the United Nations. After leaving Mendoza, Dr. Woo served for 5 years as CEO of Catholic Relief Services, a humanitarian relief and sustainable development organization operating in over 100 countries and serving more than 100 million people each year. In 2013, she was recognized as one of 500 most powerful people on the planet by Foreign Policy magazine, and one of 30 in, I think, the most important category, a force for good. Dr. Woo currently serves on the corporate boards of Aon in the UK, NiSource, Arabesque, and the International Advisory Group of Equinor from Norway. In addition to these, she served on another 4 corporate boards as well as more than 20 nonprofit boards. Most recently, she, along with others at Notre Dame, have planned and implemented the Vatican Dialogues on Energy Transition, which convenes CEOs of energy companies and the world's largest investment companies in conversation with each other and with the Holy Father. Dr. Woo is recognized for teaching, research service, and leadership through many, many different awards and 30 honorary doctorates. She's married to Dr. David Barktis, and they have 2 sons, Ryan and Justin Barktis, both Notre Dame graduates. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Carolyn Woo.
So it's a pleasure to be back. It's like being home, and this is home to me for a long time. When you come in, please pick up one of those sheets. So what I'm going to do this evening is that I'm just going to speak for about 5 minutes or so, a bit about my background, so that you have some context. And then I'm going to just do this like a jukebox. There are 10 topics on that list. And if you raise your hand first and you give me a topic, I'll speak to it. And the theme tonight really is about authentic leadership. And I recognize that this is Ethics Week and also, with a focus on women leading. So it has a bit of those. But the most important thing is that whatever I talk, I just want you to choose it. I've done a lot of speeches, and I know you could talk people into their sleep. I'm the only person who can talk in other people's sleep. So I don't want to do that to you. I really appreciate your time here. I want to have a good time. I want to have a really honest conversation with you because you're like family. So I just want to start with 5 points about my background, just so that you have some sense of what really formed my principles for how to engage people. The first, I'm going to just do 5 points. The first is that I was born less than 10 years after World War II. My parents left China, which is where all of their property and wealth is, as those are tied to land, and we lost our land, of course. After World War II was also the communist revolution, so our family relocated from China to Hong Kong. I was born in Hong Kong. My parents were the ones and older siblings who relocated. And of course, they've just gone through a war. My mother in particular, who spoke no English, had to go into a very new environment. Hong Kong was a British colony. The official language was English, and she could only speak Chinese. Everything was westernized, and she was brought up in a very sort of traditional Chinese background. And actually, between my two grandfathers, my maternal and paternal grandfathers, they had 8 wives. So that was an environment that my parents relocated in. They were sort of, in some ways, immigrants, not so much refugees, but left everything behind. And I even remembered helping my mother learn how to go on an escalator because, you know, she came from a very different world. So that's the first point. The second point is that my parents have 6 children. And the reason that they wanted 6 children, they had 6 children, was they wanted 2 sons, which is very important to the Chinese, an heir and a spare. Number 2 was a son, number 3 was a daughter, number 4 was a daughter, and I was number 5. And so I'm very glad my younger brother didn't come too soon. There was an agreement between my parents, sort of, I don't know how much of an agreement, but sort of a plan that if number 5 is not a son, my father could take a second wife. So we were still operating in that time in Hong Kong where monogamy is not the rule and is the Chinese custom to have many wives. So clearly I was not a son, and my father did not take a second wife because fortunately my younger brother follows. So that's the second point. The third point is that I was educated by the Maryknoll sisters. So the Maryknoll sisters are religious sisters who come from the United States. They were the first American congregation that decided to go into the mission. So they went everywhere. They went to Latin America, they went to India, they went to Asia, they were in China. And like a lot of people, they were evicted from China, so they came to Hong Kong and ran schools. And I was educated by the Maryknoll sisters and started speaking English in 2nd grade since they couldn't handle Cantonese. So something has to give. Either they do better Cantonese or the children will start learning in English, which was quite an experience, I still remember. But the Maryknoll sisters were my formators in faith, and I could not have better formators. They were such joyful people as they served God and just full of fun, innovation, and a deep faith. So I was trained by them for 12 years. And I remember thinking when we were very young, do they swim in their habits? Do they have hair underneath that wimple? And, how do they move around, and other things that little girls would think about. But I think by the time I was 15 or 16, and we grew up with them, my classmates and I, and there was a whole sense of, why do these people leave America, which was such an extraordinary place? I watched a lot of television, like, why would anybody in their right mind leave America? And then when they went to China, there was yellow fever, there was house arrest. Why would these women do this? And for the first time, I concluded that God must be very real to them. Because if God was not real, why would anybody do something so nonsensical? So that's the third point, which is my early faith experience. And of course, they not only gave me a good education in terms of academic preparation, but they were so much into the young women having a sense of their own ideas, their principles. They taught us how to speak and use our voice. They pushed us into debate, actually. But they really honored the sense that the women had ideas and they had leadership potential and that they needed to be able to express themselves. And of course, they never took no for an answer. I think I learned a lot about faith from the sisters. When they needed seed money for a proposal to start a new school, They didn't have enough of the seat money. And what they did was that they gave up public transportation. Instead of riding the bus, they walked. All right? And so from there, and of course, we did a lot of selling, particularly the Marionette dolls. But that was the way I saw them operating. The fourth point I want to make about my background is that my father was a brilliant man. He was unusual in the sense that he was a Chinese man who was educated first in Germany. He didn't handle German well, and then he went to Scotland. And he was trained as a marine engineer, naval architect, so he was a brilliant person. He operated in shipping. My mother was the opposite. She didn't speak English. She was educated in the home. She actually was very unprepared for modern society. But my father also had some pretty bad habits. He had a big temper. And more important, he was a gambler. He gambled big, and he gambled every night. So, and sometimes he didn't come home. And so even as a child, I think by the time I was 12 and 13 years old, I recognized how tenuous our situation was. I recognized that there was no Social Security. In fact, my father told us, we're Chinese, we don't have Social Security, we just have children. And he had his first heart attack when I was 13 years old. So I always had a sense of the very tenuous situation that my family was in, and that one day it would be my responsibility to take care of them. So that's the fourth point. The fifth and final point I just want to lay out for you is that my father had plans for my brothers, and very much like the Chinese, one would be a doctor and the other one would be a lawyer, and they would go to college. And indeed, both of them did exactly what my father had planned. But for the four daughters, it was like, whatever. But clearly, there would be no resources for us to go to college. My three older sisters never went to college. One became a flight attendant, and two became secretaries. So I was the fourth and youngest daughter, and I really wanted an education. I also knew that someday I would have to support my family. The way that the Chinese women do that was to marry rich. Well, I didn't particularly think that that path would be successful for me. I was chubby, and I was mouthy, and I didn't just look like and sound like and act like the type of woman that people would want as a daughter-in-law. Right? And in those days, it's still very much parents who make these decisions. So I decided that I really needed an education in order to support my family. I met a professor who was on leave from Purdue University. He was on leave at TWA, which was an airline. My sister was working there as a secretary, and I would go in on Saturday to help her. I was the human collator. Before they had machines to do that, you just go staple. So that was my job on Saturdays, to help Helen. And this professor came in. He was on leave, on sabbatical from TWA. He was an economist. And I asked him, I said, you're from a university. Which one is this? And he said, Purdue University. And I asked him, I said, could you just study anything you want in this university? He said, yes. Well, I have no idea where Purdue was, or Indiana, or how different it is really from Hong Kong. But that sounded good enough. And of course, I didn't have a lot of information about universities. So I applied to Purdue University. I had exactly 1 year of expenses. It was $800 a semester for an international student. And so it's $1,600 and my living expenses. So I fundraised from my siblings. My father had no money. By then, he also had terrible health. He had heart attacks and heart conditions. So I was able to, my brother, who became a doctor, helped me to pay the residence fee because he felt like he was supported in his education and that he would like to support me. And then from my siblings and little savings that I collected, I had exactly 1 year of tuition to start at Purdue University. That year, in the 2 semesters, I took 42 credit hours. And the reason I did that was it was my only year, and I was going to take as many courses that fit into my schedule as possible. So that's my background. And the rest follows. I went to Purdue, and I went to daily Mass. And the last thing I would say is that I applied for scholarship for international students, which actually there are very few scholarships for international students. They are meant to be the cash cows for universities. And even if there are some little scholarships, it's never full scholarships. So I needed a full scholarship. And I remember the day they were going to announce the scholarships. I had class till 11:20. I could go to the International Students Office to get the results, or I could go to Mass, which starts at 11:30. But if I go to Mass, it would take me to 12 o'clock. The office would be closed. I have to wait till 1 o'clock to find out my results. And I still remember I thought, it's bad news. Why would you rush to get bad news? You know, put it off, go to Mass. And I went to Mass, and I had that 1 hour where I really talked to God. And I said, this is unfair. Why is it so hard? Because I'm a woman, a girl, and my brothers get to go to college. So I remember having that heart-to-heart conversation. And of course, I got a scholarship. And the rest just followed. So this is sort of my backdrop. And yes, today I don't know how this happens, but from Purdue to Notre Dame as dean to CRS and then all these boards, I never planned that journey. My goal was not to be CEO or dean or whatever it is, didn't know what these things were. My goal was really that I could take care of my family. And I did. Right. So I just want to go from there so that you have some idea. I need you then to go to your list. This is the jukebox. And there are sort of 10 topics there, and whoever is brave enough to suggest a topic, I will go and give you some thoughts. Oh, Kathy.
Treasure lost in the attic.
Treasure lost in the attic. Okay. Treasure lost in the attic means it's something that we all have, but we forgot about it. We don't access it, we don't use it, and it's just a treasure. And that treasure is grace. The treasure is grace. We often forget that we are grace-filled people. And what that means is that how we act and who we are, we at our best, is not just left to our own accord. We are made by God. We reflect the beautiful qualities that God has in us, and that is the capacity to love, the capacity to turn to other people. We live in an extremely competitive society. And in a competitive society, it could breed out your grace because you're always ranked. You're always rated. Starting even when you were very young, and nowadays in particular, did you go to the right schools? Where do you place in your class? In your extracurricular activities, in any sports, are you a starter? Did you get to play well? Are you a star? What type of extracurricular do you have? You work in the newspapers, and are you an editor? Who are you? So everything for children, starting very young, they have a sense of, performing and competing and having, play in an orchestra. Are you a first chair? So there's very little space for people to have a sense of how precious they really are, and also to be able to appreciate other people's gifts because you're not in competition. This is a society where people always talk about win-loss column. Did you win? Did you lose? 6 versus 8, then you're a loser. 6 versus 2, you're sort of a winner. And so it's so baked into the way that we think, and also the winner takes all. If you are in a track competition, somebody comes in 2 seconds slower, they don't matter. And if you were that person, you don't matter either. And so as a society, we're conditioned to look at ourselves and to look at other people in these type of terms. And they're very unhealthy terms. I hated actually the whole idea of rankings. You know, rankings of school, rankings of everything, even rankings of public utility sewer system. We're ranked doctors. Everybody gets ranked. And it's kind of ridiculous because the type of experience that you have actually cannot be reduced into a few metrics. So the whole idea, grace with a small g, is about hospitality. It's about your ability to turn to other people and affirm other people. It's about giving people the space. It's about giving them the spotlight. And of course, grace with the big G is the ability to remember how precious we are and how precious other people are, and that we are all made in the image of God. Think about that for a minute, that there's something about you which is fashioned by God in his image, and we totally forget about it. And actually, grace is so prevalent if you're willing to open your eyes. I'll give you some example. When we were doing teaching awards, my very early time here at Mendoza, and some of my colleagues are here, one of our colleagues said, we are turning teaching into a competitive sports. And why do we do that? And we also said perhaps we should not put our most junior faculty into this game because they feel like they have to compete against the rest of us. But why do we need to turn this into sort of a competitive sports? A speaker that I remember forever and ever, and he spoke at my master's graduation, and he asked people, he said, what is charisma? And you think about charisma, you think about people who could draw a crowd. You know, I don't know who's whom you would think have charisma today. You could have your own sort of idea. But the speaker said, people who have charisma are people who can take other people as they are, to like them for what they are, and to not despise them for what they're not. If you have that type of hospitality as you engage other people, you will draw people, which is what charisma is. It's the ability to draw people. And that is, can you give that space to other people? And just to end this, we had a faculty member who left. He had difficulty getting tenure, and I had a visit with him, and he's a Latino from South America. And I said, I'm so sorry that this didn't work out for you. And what he said was, I don't look at my life as a series of trophies to be won. So this is not about a trophy that I did not win. He said, actually, competition in some ways can be helpful if you don't look at losing as a failure, but it's a signaling. It actually tells you what you are good at and what you may not be as good at. I mean, many of you play sports when you were a kid and you don't play sports anymore. You decided not to go professional with this because it may not be the best use of your talent and your time, and that you have other talents. So he said, I actually think it is important to not think of your life in terms of winning or losing, because if you win, you will always be afraid of losing. You will always be afraid of the people behind you and that whether they would be better for you, better than you. But if you think about your life, it's sort of like these things that you get into, there's a signaling about where, he's an economist, so he speaks in those terms. He said, it's a signaling as to where you could put your best energy. And he said, for me, it's not here. And it's good that I get that signal now rather than later. And I just want to end this by saying, grace is just there for the asking. It's not hard. You don't have to turn cartwheels for it. You just have to stop for a moment. And if you ask for grace, it will be there. but you have to be mindful. You have to know when you are not in that zone, and you have to stop. And when you stop, you just pray for grace. And that's who we are. We are people of grace, but we left that behind somewhere. So that is the treasure in the attic. All right, the next one. Okay.
Feminism misdirected.
Feminism misdirected. Yep. This is kind of Women Lead Week. I think feminism actually can have potential to do a lot of good. But a lot of times it's casted as the right for women to act just like men. And I think that is so silly and so small. I think what feminism should be is the right to be respected, the right to be valued, and the right to have access to the opportunities and the resources to be the best version of yourself. And no denigration of men. But the best version of yourself is not anybody else, and it's not men per se. It's really to be respected, to be valued, and to have access to what it takes to be the best version of yourself. And I feel sad when people sometimes just cast it as this is what men could do. Why couldn't I do that? I don't know if that's particularly relevant. And I think it actually diminishes what feminism is all about. So having said that, I don't think feminism, we as women who fight for it, is not just for women, it's for everyone. Everyone deserves to be respected, to be valued, and to have the channels that allow them to be the best version of themselves. And if you think about in society, who are the people who are blocked, where they do not have access? And in development work at CRS, actually there's a lot of barriers where people, they don't have land rights, they cannot go to school, they cannot vote. There's a lot of different things that prevent people to be respected and to be valued. But if we really understand and really sort of work for how important this is not just for women, it's for everyone, including for men. I remember having a conversation with the Gates Foundation, and they had a lot of programs for women. By the way, in development experience, if you empower women, if you support women, you actually solve a lot of problems at the same time. You deal with violence, you deal with health, you deal with the health of children. There's lots of things that if you work the issue of sort of empowering women, a lot of the other problems get solved at the same time. So there was a lot of focus on women and empowering women, training women, giving assets to women, and so on and so forth. I remember having a conversation at the Gates Foundation, and I said, your approach is logical, but it's wrong. It's missing something, and that is you take the men out of the equation. You single out the women, you lift up the women, and you just pour all the resources in it. But the women are actually operating within families. Their relationship to their husbands is actually very important. They don't operate as a single, they operate in relationships. So you have to rethink how to build up that relationship and how to build up that intervention so the women's family, and particularly the husband, is part of that picture. And so that's what it is. And another point I want to make is that, and I see a lot of that because I work in organizations of a lot of different organizations. I think that sometimes women, because now we are alerted, by the Me Too movement and other things, we can become very shrill and very demanding in the way that we interpret people's behavior towards us. We sometimes become very intolerant. I remember a young woman coming to me and she said, you need to talk to so-and-so because he said, I look nice today. She was, I don't know, whatever, in a new dress or something, and he said, you look nice today. And she said, that is totally inappropriate. And I had to go into this and say, what do you attribute to this statement that you find inappropriate? And she said, well, first of all, appearance should not be relevant. And by commenting on my appearance, he just diminished me. And I have to go into this whole thing about, do you think that's really the intent? If you saw somebody who came in with a new tie, is it okay to say, I like your tie? What is sort of like social banter? Or sometimes a desire just to open a conversation and be nice. I said, you cannot just interpret every one of these sentences with the worst interpretation which is attributable. So I just also want to say, for a lot of women, don't get to the point where you expect the communication to be on your terms and defined by your ears. Stop and really think about what that interaction is about. Some of it is really not meant to be demeaning. Or people to ask me, is it okay if I hold the door for a woman? I said, it's okay to hold the door for anyone, for the elderly, just whoever it is. And I am not good at that. Sometimes if I'm going to the theater, I just want to get in there first. I beat everybody to the line, and that is not very good. So I just said, so there are a lot of things, particularly I think for women, to be sensitive to the point when you think that you're truly being put down, and when you think that there are some cultural and social practices which are not meant to be mean-spirited. Look, I work in international development. I go to the Vatican, and a lot of the archbishops and so on, they can't even look at me. They could only talk to Sean, who is the COO, and I said, great, Sean, be sure to talk to Bishop so-and-so because we need this done. He doesn't feel comfortable talking to me. And it's fine, this person has probably been 30 years uncomfortable talking to women. I go to a lot of Muslim country where I am supposed to stay with the women, not with the men. And a lot of times they let me go in and sit with the men, but I break all sorts of protocols, and I'm very sensitive about breaking protocols which have been there for years. Yes, you could say, they should be able to sort of handle women, but, that is not for me to challenge right at that time when I need to have a conversation with the person. So I just also want to say that. By the way, there's this whole thing about pay equity, and I just want to say large companies, particularly global companies now, if they operate in Europe at all, there's a law whereby companies have to evaluate their pay equity. They have to run these regression analyses to see whether there are people who are outliers and how to deal with outliers. And I like that law. I think that those analyses are important. I do believe that sometimes women do have to stand up for themselves. I'm going to share a story. Some of my colleagues will remember that. I was a second-year dean, and these jobs are difficult at first, so working away and so on. And I found out that a dean of another college who started the same time as me was promised a sabbatical after the third year, a whole year off. First of all, I didn't know how that could take place because your first 5 years, there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of changes. There's a lot of things to put in place. So I didn't know how you could really go away after 3 years. And I've never heard of this. Sabbaticals of faculty is after 7 years. And for administrators, they don't really exist until you're done with your term. Never heard of, and I came from a public school, so perhaps public schools are not like private schools. They don't offer sabbaticals for an administrator after 3 years. So I remember just thinking about this and thought, this is not good. This is not fair. And I'm not the type of person who counts small things, but I went to the provost and I said, why is it that another dean can take a sabbatical and this was never offered to me? And the provost said, well, you never asked for it. This person asked for it as part of the agreement to accepting the job. And I looked at him and I said, do you really think you could stand in front of people and say, this female dean didn't ask for a good deal, so we're not giving it to her? I said, do you really think that could pass as an argument? And do you think that is really fair? Because in my mind, I didn't even reach into such a benefit. I've never heard of it. And I said, really? And he said, oh, yeah. And then he said, what do you want? He said, do you want a sabbatical? And in those days, our school was not well funded at all, and my colleagues would know. I said, I would like a year of my salary deposited into the budget of the school. So I think that at certain time, and this provost has become one of my best friends. You know, he's a president of a university now. We stay in touch and so on. And I think at that point, he really hadn't thought it through. It was not a mean intent, but the way that it came out was sort of like, really, that would be a major inequity. So I'm just saying that you have to use a judgment. There are times when it is truly sort of like not fair. There are times just cut people some space, going back to sort of the whole grace issue. All right, another one. All right, gentleman at the back, Tom.
Dean Woo, you look very nice today.
Oh, thank you. Really, I tried hard for it, actually. Okay.
What is the sure thing?
What is the sure thing? All right. I could just ramble on, but I want to make sure I get the whole thing. The sure thing is God. That is the only sure thing. And for us, it's really a journey of how real God is to us. And it's a journey. We're never there. We always hold back in some ways. We don't give it all to God. We don't trust it all to God. But God is the only thing that you could really count on. And it's always a question, do you believe that He is right here with you? Right here with you as you make those decisions. That you don't have to be perfect. And that you could be forgiven if you ask for it. And that you are loved beyond imagination. That this is not a scoring game where God today said 3 check marks, tomorrow 2 crosses, you know, and then the next day. And that the grace given to you and help given to you is dependent or proportionate to how good or how not good you are. When I came to Notre Dame, every morning I would start my day at the grotto. And I would say, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and Blessed Mother, today is a work day. We all have to go to work. And I would go into the little chapel in the Mendoza building. I would have a cup of coffee. There are people who told me I should never go into chapel with a cup of coffee, but I feel like that is the kitchen of God's house. You know, the kitchen is really the center of life in a home. That's where everybody gathers and you share your day and you say, oh, I have a tough day today. I have a tough meeting. I don't know exactly what to do. As somebody said, I have a test coming up. I'm not totally prepared. So the kitchen is sort of like where sort of a family comes together. And whenever I have a cup of coffee in my hand, I go into chapel, I just sit down and I just tell God, what is the day going to be like? And I say, help me in this and that. And then I say, yesterday I asked you to help me not lose my patience. And I didn't do very well. Where were you, when I had this? So the key really is how real is God in your life? Because if God is real, there is a certain way of behaving. There's a certain way of leading and managing. I tell the CRS people, I said, a lot of times we do our work and we do the analysis. What would work? Where are the risks? How might we cover our tracks? Is this too big of a leap for us? I said, do we ever factor in that this is actually the work of God and we're just given a little part? And should we set a chair for the Holy Spirit so that we are reminded, that this is not just we doing God's work, but we are working with God. God gave us this work to do, and that he entrusted these people to us. And we shouldn't think small, because it's not just based on us. I would say in my whole life, I went through a lot of situations where I would get to the point of a riverbank and I don't have a boat. There's no bridge. I don't know exactly how to cross this. And something would happen. And if you look into your own life, you all probably have had some experience of that. When it is not by your wits or your capabilities that something came through, but something came through. When you needed encouragement, someone showed up. When you needed a door to be opened, that door opened. I always, when I was younger, I worried a lot. I was a worry wart, and I have reasons to be worried. But I would say, starting in my 40s, I came into a very realization was that I always felt like it all depended on me. It all depended on me. And I decided, no, it didn't all depend on you. God was there all the time, all the time. And in the work at CRS, sometimes, there's dangerous situations. Every year we could lose a couple of colleagues, whether they were abducted on the way to Afghanistan. We had a few people who died on the Boeing 737 MAX that went from Nairobi to Addis Ababa, or the other way around, because those are two very big development hubs. So we have 3 colleagues who died. And in my decision to go to CRS, I thought, these are dangerous places. People would never choose to go on vacation in Central Africa region, or Malawi, or Afghanistan, or Iraq, or whatever. These are dangerous situations, and a lot of times we're in war zones. Syria, for example. So I said, my life, Notre Dame campus is not exactly a place of danger. My office in Baltimore, for those people who have visited me, is on the edge of the west side of Baltimore, which is high crime. Within a few blocks of my office, there are always murders, and we have prayer vigils for people. There are drug addicts on the street of my office. And so it is not a safe place to go. But that's where we located our office. And so the whole question is, was I scared? You betcha. And my husband also had AFib, which is irregular heartbeat, and he could just black out. And I thought, what would happen if I'm not there? But all of this, at a certain point, you just say, do you think that God has your back? Do you really believe that you're in the palm of God's hands? And do you believe that when death does happen, that's not the worst thing? Because death is not a punishment. It's a change in life, as we know, is on the way to eternal life. Do you really believe in that? And that was the test of that. So I would say the only sure thing really is God. And I think our journey is how much we internalize that we really do believe that God has us, in his sight, and everything else will follow.
Can I make just a follow-up comment? We surveyed our accounting graduates over the last 50 years ago, and one of the questions was related to life satisfaction factors. So we had 9 measures of life satisfaction on a 7-point scale, and my faith is very important to me, had the lowest score.
Oh my God.
I'm just wondering why that is true for Notre Dame students.
I don't know. This is a very big issue. By the way, there's another thing that faith can do for you, and that is whenever you're confronted with a challenge or a mission or whatever, there are two questions which are critical, and you need those two questions. One is, what could we do? The other question is, what should we do? If you ask, what could we do first, it gives you this, and what should we do come out within that set. If you ask the question, what should we do, it starts out with here, and then it directs you on what could you do. So leading with the question of what should you do is premised on faith, because you're looking at a situation and it says, what does that situation need? Not necessarily what does my capability lead me to do, or what does our organizational capability need me to do. And I think that that creates a difference in terms of people who seek that innovation, who want that gap, who's not afraid of that gap to go. But it's a question, you're only not afraid of your gap if you feel like you're not in this on your own, that there is a way, that God is there. If it is the right motivation, if you're trying to do the right thing for other people, that God is also part of that work. And that, I think, sometimes a lot of not-for-profit organization and even faith-based organization, I think when in their planning, they don't make room that there is the Holy Spirit. And I just want to say I'm a strategy person. I'm a very analytical person. I'm a great strategy person, actually. So not having not doing silly things is important to me, because you can only have so much resources in terms of what you should do. But I think stretching beyond what you could see yourself doing, an organization doing, and knowing that it will be fine. We'll just start this journey and see where it leads us. It will be fine. I think that's also an outcome of faith. Don't play it safe.
Could you elaborate on it's not what you know, not even who you know?
Yeah, that's very important. What you know may help you succeed a little bit. What you don't know will sink you. Okay? So a lot of times we focus on what we know, how smart we are, but that actually creates problems, and that is you don't ask yourself what you don't know. And what you don't know is where it creates blind spots. What you don't know is also what caused you to get people who are better than you. Each person that you get should be better than you in the areas that you hire them for. You don't know it all. Knowing what you don't know also forces you to be careful and also to learn, to say, I don't know this. And I can't really direct my team. I don't need to know as much as they do, but I need to know enough so that I could give them the support that they need. So it's really the beginning of a learning journey. And I think to know what you don't know is the beginning of humility. Not arrogance. CEOs who think that they know everything and therefore they give all the orders, and they basically have their plan and other people's role is just to implement it, is dangerous. It's dangerous. And so I've been on different boards. One of the boards I was on failed completely. So very completely that it could not come back from bankruptcy. Failed after it was written up and from good to great as an exemplary company, and that was Circus City. And so I just want to say the key in leadership is actually to be mindful of what you don't know. Not to the point that you're paralyzed, but to the point that you could cover your own sort of deficient area. And if you don't think you have any, then that's delusion. So the key really is what you do know will help you get going, will help you have some degrees of success, of what you do know. But what you don't know will sink you. And unless you're aware of what you don't know, then you can't really build the team that covers all of those other areas. So that's the point. It's not what you know, it's actually be mindful of what you don't know. I don't know how we're doing on time. Anybody else? Okay.
You talk about what you're most proud of.
People ask me what I'm most proud of, and there are positions, there are awards and so on, but those are not the things that I'm most proud of. I'm most proud of two things. They're sort of related to one another. I'm most proud of stepping into the fear of things that really scared me half to death. So some of the big ones are like leaving home in Hong Kong to come over to the US, where I have no idea of how this works, no idea whether we do well, no idea what is this culture. I actually find freshman culture to be one of the most difficult culture because freshmen, they themselves are insecure. So they come into groups, they find each other and they stick like glue. And I have nobody to find. I've never been on a cheerleader or whatever squad or whatever it is. And I showed up on campus in a pleated skirt with knee socks. So I didn't look like an American co-ed. But anyway, coming back to this, overcoming a fear, coming from Hong Kong at 18 to Purdue, leaving Notre Dame for CRS was a very difficult decision because the job at that time was becoming easier and easier. We were the #1 school. Everybody, major donors want their children to come into the business school. And, people treat you well because the school is ranked well, and I have tenure. So you could hear from my story that security is very important to me because I never had it. I always have to worry also for my parents. And so I gave up tenure. And I'm so proud of myself, I couldn't actually speak, because it was something that I never thought I could do. I also didn't know any other Chinese academics that gave up tenure. And I did not know anything about international development. Out of the 5,000 employees, they all knew more than I did. And going into that type of a situation. So I think stepping up to your fear, by the way, it was a very difficult decision, and I actually sought spiritual counseling because I kept on doing these pros and cons, and they get longer and longer, but they don't move you one way or the other. There are these pros and these cons, and there's some more to it, and it's not like there's a scale. So I knew I was stuck, and I went to see my spiritual counselor, a wonderful priest. And I said, Father Ken, I'm stuck. I've done a lot of thinking. I have my analysis. Do you want to see it? My pros and cons. I've done my homework. I want you to see it. And he said, no. He said, if going on the analytical wavelength will solve your problem, you would have solved it. See? He said, this is not an analytical problem. And he said, so I said, what do I need to do? He said, well, just carry a pencil and a piece of paper with you all the time, and it will come to you. What are your fears and what are your joys? Not pros and cons, but these are matters of the heart. What are your fears? List them. Giving up tenure was one of them. Going into dangerous areas, another one. Not knowing, the work is another one, is a major thing. And then there were the joys. And the joys was that, a sense that I know refugees, I know immigrants, I know that life. Because I grew up in a culture where I saw people lost everything and the journey to start everything again. I know the journey of women. I know women in cultures who don't have a lot of access. And then all of a sudden it dawned on me that this was closing a loop for me, that all these other things that I did, it didn't seem to have anything to do with development work, but somehow it did. It's really about a strategy sort of reformulation. But more important, my heart could identify with the lives of these people, and most important is that I saw and I lived through how refugees' life become better. That is not just a big sob story. It's not just a big, tear-jerker of people without things. I lived through the culture where I saw people who had nothing build their lives again. And actually, that's a very important thing to have deep down when you run these programs, is to believe, yes, if it takes, these are the things that people would be able to do. They could raise their children, children could go to school, and all of those things. So I just want to say I'm proudest of the fact that I did sort of face my fears, the fears of what something happening to my husband, as I just said. I faced my fears. And, this is also sort of where faith comes in. And I'm very proud, very grateful for the fact that I made a promise to my family that I would take care of them. I made a promise to my father when he had a heart attack. And he said, of all the 6 children, you are the most equipped to take care of your siblings and your mother and my nanny. And I did. I was 13 years old when I said, okay. I probably didn't know what that meant, but I did. And in fact, I would say something. There is a piece in there which says it's not how hard you work. It's how much you care. If you care for the people who are dependent on you, if you care, as in CRS, that we that we receive the money which is not meant for us, and we're a $1 billion operation, that the money given to us is not for us. It's for people to have another day. That people would die if you don't do your work well. That $5 would feed a family of 5 for 5 days. That there's not money coming and coming and coming and coming because there are more and more disasters and limited money. That when you hold that money and you run those programs, you have to think about what is the most effective way to secure not just today's well-being for the people, but can you extend that into the longer term? Because you could see people can die. I was with a group of women. They were in Afghanistan. They had just gone through a lot of training. They were running a business. They were trained to run a business. And they had a bakery business. And they sold these butter cookies. So they received an oven and training, and they received 3 months of inventory. I met with the woman, the lead woman, and she was breastfeeding a baby. I said, is this your firstborn? And she said, no, my firstborn died from starvation. But this one has a lot to eat because we're very successful. So she said, the butter cookies, they sold it to the local police. You know how police love donuts? I guess that's a global phenomenon. And these police bought out all of their cookies. Their 3 months of inventory was sold in 1 month. But because of their success, she had enough to eat that she could breastfeed and sustain a child. And when she was in starvation, she could not sustain a child, and that child died. So anyway, so in your work, I mean, there are people who work very hard. There are people who work very hard to do a good job or to get promoted or whatever it is. I think the people who really make a difference is how much they care. And I never aimed for success. I just wanted to make sure that I keep my scholarship, and if I'm in a program that I would pass that program, because I just knew that I had a role to play in my family's well-being. Sorry, it's emotional about that. I think we're running late, but I saw someone at the back there who had a hand. Let's just take that the last question.
Yeah, if you can elaborate on how did you navigate isms throughout your life and your career, meaning racism, ageism, atheism, and there are a few isms that can be named. And I think it belongs to actually one of your lives, the sense of belonging, a second look.
A belonging. And this is particularly directed at women. A lot of times you go into an organization, you say, I don't belong here. I don't go to the same gym. And I don't, like to play golf, which is where those guys go. And I didn't go to the same schools that they did. And I didn't, know these other people. So you could imagine in my life, I did a lot of that. How many Chinese women do you think I run into in the various things that I did, whether it is with AACSB, which are all deans of business schools, and for a long time, it was really dominated, by Caucasian men. There were just not a lot of women deans at that time, and definitely not a Chinese woman dean. I go on these boards and I would say, oh, all those guys, they play golf. They all go to the opera benefit, and they're all on the zoo board, and they all, I don't know what else, but I have all of these things where I don't talk sports. Yeah, so I just, I don't belong. I just, I'm just an odd duck among this group of people. And I don't know when, probably again around my 40s, where I said, well, belonging is not a big deal. I could be effective without belonging. That doesn't matter, I'm not in the same clubs. I just have to do my homework and be prepared, and go into a meeting when there's discussion. If I have things to say, I will say it. If I have thoughts, I will share my thoughts. If I agree or synthesize, I'll do that. If I disagree, I will say that too. And it came to me like, if they wanted someone just like them, there's many people to choose from. If they wanted somebody just like them. The reason they didn't choose someone just like them is because they need a different perspective. They need a different set of experiences to look at things. And along with it, a lot of times you say something, right? You say, did people agree with me? Nobody said anything. Did I just say something stupid? Did what I say, was that important? I stop thinking that way. Like, I don't care. I think it's important. I'm not trying to make point. I'm just, really, this is important to me. I'm going to say it. And I'm not waiting for somebody to sort of like acknowledge approval of my point. Women do that a lot. They're waiting for someone to say, oh, that's a good point. Glad you made it. Well, sometimes nobody gives that feedback. It's fine. And then I found out, I have two more things to say. I found out everybody feels that way. Like everybody has a story of why they don't quite match up to whatever they think is the dominant group. I've actually talked to an extremely popular priest, and he told me he feels the same way. I talked to one of my fellow directors. One time I gave this talk, and this guy used to be the CEO of a very big company. And he said he felt that way too. So I don't know if it is a universal feeling, but I think now belonging is overrated. We don't need to belong going in. We just need to know why we are needed in a particular situation, what that job is that we're expected to do, and do it well. So what if during break everybody talks about Super Bowl and you hardly remember who played, and definitely not any plays that you could contribute to? Then at that point, just do your email. I want to end on this. When I was at Purdue, I packed everything in. I think at the end of the second year, I was tapped from Mortarboard, which is a very big deal. It's a women's leadership group. And I was nominated and selected, not because I was part of any fraternity or sorority. I did not run any student organization. I hardly had time. I was all focused on my courses. But I spent all my free time at the church because that was home to me. I went to daily mass, and afterwards people would feed me. People bring cookies to the priest. They would give me cookies, So it was a good place, and it was a good study place so that I don't have to go back to the dorm every time. It was central to campus. I just went in there, and whenever there was some program, I would help out, from anything. I would just help out and help out more. But for those reasons, they nominated me for this Mortarboard Leadership Award for Women. Okay, very exciting. I have no idea what leaders do, but I was glad to be nominated. And we had a retreat of these girls. Okay, so grab my stuff. They have a list of things you need, pillows. Okay. I went. And, you know, in my cabin, there was this young woman. She was head of a sorority, and she was like Mary Thompson III. I mean, this is a make-up name. And my gosh. And she had this silk pillow. And and I said, this isn't from the dorm, is it? And she thought that I had horns or something. She said, oh no. She said, you know, you need a silk pillow because your hair doesn't knot up when you have a silk pillow. But all I had was a dorm issued pillow. You know, like, I have no idea where silk pillows would come from. So, and I don't know what else they were talking about. I mean, clearly on things related to sororities and so on that I had not a sense, you know, whatever the social gathering was. And so I was really like pretty down, and it was probably one of my first sort of outing with people who are different than me. And I went to the person, the council advisory, the advisor who was leading it, and I said, Mrs. Nearbold, I don't belong here. And I said, I feel like I'm totally a fish out of this. I'm not a president of anything. I have never stepped foot in a sorority. So the Greek council or whatever it is, I don't know anything about that. I don't remember running any meetings. And I said, I just don't belong. And I was probably afraid that the next day they would call me to do anything. I didn't know the Robert's Rules of Order. You know, I came from Hong Kong, and we don't have democracy or student government. Like, I have no idea what these things are, and what if I'm called to have to do these things? And Mrs. Nearbold, whom I still see once every so often, and she said, it's not important that you belong. And she said, you are here for a reason. And that reason is obvious to the people who chose you, however you feel. And one day you would understand why you are here. So I think that we all sometimes go into situations and have this sort of like, we're lesser. When we say we don't belong, it's never I'm better than the rest. Well, there are people who think that way, but that's terrible. But if you say, I don't measure up in some ways, I don't have the type of social capital with people, I speak with the wrong accent, and I've gone into consulting where everybody went to other schools. They're not Purdue University. I said, oh, I didn't go to the right school. But I think that's a waste of time. So belonging is not necessary. It takes a second look and catch yourself when you're thinking that way. So you've been a great audience. My talk says 7:15. Thank you very much.